we're live. It is Tuesday, October 20th, 5:02 p.m. We are 2 minutes late because we were talking about Zoom sex scandals. And I just want to say that I have two things to say about Zoom sex scandals. The first is that I do think that if we all had the nightmare anxiety dream to end all nightmare anxiety dreams, it might be to be caught masturbating by the staff of the New Yorker. Like a panel judging, David Remnick and Masha Gessen and Jane Mayer. The second thing that I just want to say about Zoom sex scandals is I think we all deserve congratulations as a nation for making it for 7 whole months of quarantine before we had our first major celebrity Zoom sex scandal. We don't normally go that long without a sex scandal in this country. This one's more fun and interesting than some others. And I think the happening on Zoom is appropriate. I'm promising that the second of these will not be a Crowdcast sex scandal involving In Lieu of Fun.
But can we actually, should I write something for like McSweeney's or something that is like a Shouts and Murmurs like parody of the Jeffrey Toobin sex scandal? I feel like I should.
It feels like the kind of thing that Hannah Neprash should improvise limericks about. We are not allowed to have fun anymore. We're allowed to have a little bit more fun than apparently Jeff Toobin is, although it seems like Toobin may have been having a little too much fun, which, of course, too much fun always invariably resolves to not being allowed to have fun anymore. So it turns out you can have fun or you can be a New Yorker writer. You can't do both, at least not on Zoom.
Don't say that. I also write for the New Yorker. I actually have been
And when was the last time the staff of the New Yorker caught you masturbating on
never,
Zoom? Kate
ever,
Klonick?
never.
Exactly.
Yeah, never,
right.
Ever gonna happen.
I
might just actually like lock my laptop in a Faraday box or something, like, and the next time I have a call with them.
I do want to say that back when I was doing my research on sextortion, somebody brought to my attention the fact that it is an incredible design flaw and an intentional design flaw of all modern computers that there is no hardware off switch for the webcams, and that you could make a big difference if you just had a frickin' on-off switch for them. So I just want to say, from now on, that switch is called a Toobin switch. We can...
Can we actually, as long as we're riffing on this, can we have a moment for like all of the times that we've had politicians or people accidentally post live on Twitter things that they meant for DMs or things that they meant for like text messages or like something to that effect, and we still hadn't seen like a Zoom sex scandal until just now? I just kind of thought that was amazing.
I think it's great. I mean, I think it shows that we are a restrained society and that we have been living in an age of innocence from which we are only now emerging in our full debauchery. And by the way, for everyone saying put a piece of tape over your webcam, I do fucking In Lieu of Fun every day.
Yeah.
Now,
you can't have sticky stuff all over your webcam.
You can't have sticky stuff all over your webcam. Fine for you guys. But, for those of us who, by the way, live, I'm in a room that's glass on 3 sides. And, I can lower the blinds but you can't ask me to put sticky tape over the thing. So, the moral of the story is, don't masturbate on Zoom in conference calls with the New Yorker. It's really that simple. Only do it in conference calls with the Atlantic.
Well done. Well done.
All right.
Good close.
Speaking of which, where are our
yet.
guests?
She said that she was going to be here any second. She said 5 minutes, like 5 minutes ago, and so she should
Oh,
be
so
here.
she'll be here. She'll be here momentarily.
But
And so we can just keep joking about Jeffrey Toobin.
I mean, yeah, I was actually thinking that, like, I've been wondering for a long time. I do not have I bought my own laptop, and it's not for those reasons, but because I actually just really want to have more control over like my settings and everything else. And so like, I just have my own laptop. But I've always been super interested in the line between computers that are for work and computers that invariably make like a switch over to work. I know a few people who are really religious about having different computers for different functions, and ne'er the two shall ever like share documents and meet. But like and so some of those people are programmers that like they do all their programming on one and like personal stuff. And I don't know how you draw those lines anymore.
I can't do those lines. I mean, somebody sends me like, you know, sometimes the same emails contain work and personal stuff.
Yeah.
You know, like,
right.
What's the line between, and that's beyond the fact that I'm married to a Brookings colleague.
Right.
You know, like, leave that aside for a minute. But, like, you know, I have pretty substantial personal relationships with a whole lot of people I work with. When Jonathan Rausch and I email each other, is that business or personal? I mean, that's just a line that I don't think I could maintain. Listen, to everybody who's yapping about David Plotz being annoying.
Wait.
In the
why
chat.
Why are people saying that David? What did David do?
Cut it out. I don't know, but people should. You know, David Plotz is one of my oldest friends in Washington, and you know, if you want to complain about David Plotz being annoying, there are a lot of places to do it other than in the chat that I host. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
but
Matthew, you are not allowed to have fun anymore.
We should have David back on. Actually, that would be fun.
David Plotz, who announced his new business today.
Oh, what's his new business?
He is going to run a podcasting company focusing on local news in cities around the country.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. So we are here to talk about the future of online free speech with Emily Bazelon, who wrote a lengthy piece on the subject in the New York Times Magazine.
She just showed up.
We have one thing missing from that endeavor, which is Emily Bazelon, but she is now here, and we are bringing her in.
Yay.
She, because she is a virtuous human being, got to miss our extended series of jokes about Jeffrey Toobin. And we will not ask her about Jeffrey Toobin. We will just go into a high-minded discussion of the future of online free speech. The screen says she is accepted and connecting, which means she should pop up momentarily.
Wonderful.
And there is another Emily in the audience who I almost brought in by accident, but that didn't happen.
I had a hard time loading. I had to like restart my whole browser. I don't know. It like let go of all my permissions for some reason. I don't know.
No, Crowdcast is a complicated little endeavor.
It is, but
yes.
It's also kind of great, and I like it a lot better than other things. But it is annoying. It's a heavy piece of software.
It's Crowdcast reminds me a little bit of Brazil, the movie where they have the super high-tech society that doesn't quite work. Hello, Emily Bazelon.
Hello. Sorry about that. I got myself into too many things in this day. I apologize.
It happens.
It does happen.
Welcome to In Lieu of Fun.
Thank you. I was actually and am actually really looking forward to this.
I'm dying to talk about I've been wanting to just message you and badger you about the piece and like my thoughts about it for a little while, but I'm going to drop a link to it in the chat so that people who haven't had a chance to see it can see it. But before we kind of get into the substance of it, Emily, like I have always wondered like what your process for writing looks like. And I've wondered this since I first started like reading you and listening to you in Slate and like everything back in the like. Actually, I really loved a piece that you wrote once about babka. Did we talk about?
Yeah,
do you remember that piece?
We talked about that, but thank you for remembering, Kate. I do. Yeah. I remember that piece.
I loved that piece. And I was like, oh, there's this whole other side of Emily Bazelon that's like lovely and talks about Babka. But I was hoping that you could kind of like talk about, I don't know, a little bit about how your career's developed and like how you go from being a reporter to being at an academic institution and how it floats back and forth. I feel like you must
I know the deep dark secret of Emily's career.
Yeah.
Oh, what is the deep dark
secret? Tell Ben. I'm curious what there could be well, actually, there's really nothing. So I wonder.
No, I think the deep dark secret of Emily's career is that Emily was a star intern at the Washington Post who could not be hired by the Washington Post because of a distant family relationship that they decided precluded her hiring under the nepotism policy. And so she went to Slate, and that is how Emily ended up at Slate.
Oh.
Yep, that's all true.
That's so crazy.
So crazy. Because it was like you were it was like a first cousin by marriage, right?
Yeah, Stephen Muffson, my husband Paul's cousin, a lovely person who was in Beijing as this all was going on, had nothing to do with my getting that internship. And when we called him, because I almost got fired on the first day of the internship, because they had a form that included cousins in their nepotism rule. And so I carefully wrote down that I had a cousin-in-law. I had, by the way, also gotten married like a month before this started.
That was your first mistake. Sorry.
Exactly. Totally.
I mean, over disclosure, dude. You should have.
Only in this little way was
the proper answer. Do you have any cousins here? Is no.
Right. But then they didn't check the form until I started. And so the first day they like took me into a room by myself and were like, you can't participate in the training. We have to figure out what to do with you. And I called my dad, who's a lawyer, and I was like, well, they can't just like fire me, right? Because like I have a reliance interest or whatever. I had 1 year of law school. And he was like,
he's like, fire you, employee. You're fucking gone.
Yeah, so they let me stay for the summer, but then they didn't let me come back. And you're right. I mean, I didn't get to Slate until years later, but it's true that I was not able to come back to the Washington Post, and I have not thought about that for a while. So thank you, Ben, for reminding me.
That is a really good story.
I've always thought that was like part of your origin story. It was like you were like a person who. Because you were a person who the Washington Post absolutely should have gobbled up, and they had this inane rule. And it was right at the time when Slate was kind of, like now it's a total non-risk to go to a place like Slate. But, then Slate was still like, online media was still something else. And so you ended up going there and doing incredible work over a long period of time that you probably couldn't have done at the Washington Post just because it involved more kind of opinion features type writing. And, between you and Dahlia, you really kind of blazed a path for a certain type of legal writing at Slate.
Oh, I think
the let's give Dahlia more credit because she really all of the sort of Supreme Court dispatch, humor, irreverence, that like she had that going long before I showed up at Slate. So I just want to.
Yeah, but like I remember starting at Talking Points Memo and turning to one of my colleagues, Paul Keel, who later went to ProPublica, which I think he still is at. And I turned to Paul and was like, he was leaving and I was taking over his job. He was much better at it than I ever was. And I was like, my dream one day is to write at Slate. And and Paul was like, why? And I was like, because Emily Bazelon and Dahlia Lith would write for Slate. And he was like, I think you can make that happen someday. And I was like, I hope so. Like, that'd be the best.
That's very nice.
I was 23. But like, I do think that like you did do that. And then like, I don't think I became aware of like, I don't know when your Yale affiliation happened, but I didn't become aware of that until much later, I don't think. But.
Yeah, I started working at Yale when we moved back to New Haven and we moved here because of my husband. My husband Paul works in the history department because of his job, and I always forget. I think it's like 12 years ago. So I mean, I guess just briefly in answer to your original question, I mean, I went to law school, unlike Ben, didn't have it together to train myself in law. I always, when students ask me whether they should go to law school, I always say, well, you know, you can spend a lot of money like I did, and I loved law school, or you can teach yourself a ton, and you might want to consider the fact that Ben Winnis did not go to law school, and he knows
or Linda.
more. What?
Linda Greenhouse.
Yes, Linda has that 1 year master's, so Ben is in.
That's the perfect intermediate solution.
Didn't she get the master's years later after
yes,
she'd been covering this? So she didn't cover
my exemplar of the person who doesn't go to law school at all and then knows more about his area of law and coverage than anybody on the planet, right? Like, obviously you don't need to go to law school. But I did. And so I think I emerged from it with a sort of sense of confidence about the kinds of questions I wanted to be asking, and an area that, you know, law is broad. There's lots I don't know anything about, but I'm always willing to try to, you know, put my shovel in the dirt and start trying to figure things out. And so I had the idea for this First Amendment story. Honestly, my file is the folder I opened in Dropbox is from December 2018. And I went to Stanford and did a reporting trip for this piece in March of 2019. And then, I mean, Kate, I think I called you to talk about it like a year ago, because you were working on your great Facebook oversight board piece, but you were like,
yeah, we talked about a while ago, but yeah, it was a while ago. I almost forgot about it. Yeah. I thought maybe it had come out and I'd missed it or something.
No. And there were various moments where I thought like, oh no, I've missed my chance. Like, this is so much stuff that I wanted to say is now so much part of the zeitgeist. But I think, you know, what I wanted to do with this piece was to try to take a step back from the actual crisis of disinformation and talk about the structural legal reasons why I think that it's going more poorly in the United States than in Europe and Canada and some other democracies. And I think, if anything, like the thing I care the most about people taking away is just the idea that the United States may not have the best approach to this. I mean, I think we tend to be very American exceptionalist, proud of our First Amendment, and there are lots of reasons we should be, and we can talk about that. But I think also there are drawbacks to our what I would call libertarian approach. And they're not, my quibble is not with the text. Like, I'm all for freedom of speech and freedom of the press and freedom of assembly. It's really, my questions really have
It's religious liberty you hate.
I also like religious liberty.
You hate the Privileges and Immunities Clause, like that.
That's
fucker.
the 14th Amendment.
As somebody who actually hates American free speech jurisprudence, let me say that I loved your piece.
You do? Oh, thank you. So I want to hear why you hate it.
Yeah.
Oh, I hate it because I think a lot of it's indefensible. I think Brandenburg is indefensible. I think the true threats doctrine is indefensible. And I don't believe, and I agree with Sam Alito, that it isn't even a serious question whether you should be able to make a film of beautiful women stomping with high heels on small furry animals. That's a stupid question. And I think there are lots of countries who that manage free speech and its competing interests better than we do, including our neighbor to the north. With all respect to Pauline and Alejandro, who are now, I'm sure, triumphing over me in the chat. I just think we get a lot of it wrong, and we get a lot of it wrong in a fashion that is relatively ill-considered, and when we get called on it, we respond in this circular fashion, but the First Amendment. And by the way, campaign finance is another example of that. There's a whole range of areas where the First Amendment, therefore, does not strike me as a reasonable answer. But it's the one that we give from the civics classroom to the Supreme Court, and I find it silly. So I love a piece that says, gee, maybe there are some costs to doing it this way. This also gets to Kate and my disagreement about Section 230, but let's leave that aside for a minute. But my question is, and this, I say this, all of that as a long preface to saying that I'm not sure these countries that have different free speech traditions from ours are actually handling the disinformation problem any better than we are. And it seems to me you can still see all the same garbage on Facebook in Canada and Australia that you can here. And so my question is, like, I totally agree with it. You don't make a strong argument in the piece, but I would say the impulse behind the inquiry. But is the premise wrong? Are these countries actually having success in the anti-disinformation wars that are any more substantial than ours?
Well, I guess the evidence that I uncovered or came across that persuaded me they're having some more success was about the comparative research about the right-wing media ecosystem's feedback loop. So, when you look at Yochai Benkler's work and that whole group of researchers at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard, and you read their book, right, which to me was really important and helpful.
Yochai's
Panda, what?
It's an amazing book.
I'm sure I can't imagine we didn't talk about it, Kate, when we were talking about this piece. So
it's amazing.
You read that work, and to quickly summarize, they have 4 million news stories, and they're looking at all the links online among and between those stories, mostly in 2016 and 2017. And they just uncover this enormous feedback loop of propaganda spreading. And one of their findings is that before Trump's election, often the conspiracy theories and fear-mongering and falsehoods and disinformation started on like 8chan and subreddit and moved into the mainstream. And then after Trump becomes president and is really able to drive the news, especially Fox, which they think operates like a party press, that more and more you see the most important and most damaging disinformation campaigns start from Trump, go to Fox, and then go to social media, and then come back. And in some ways it doesn't matter, because either way you see just this enormous propagation of disinformation. And so my story starts with a lead that's about one of many examples. I could have picked this concocted notion that this mostly academic project called the Transition Integrity Project was like a democratic coup in the making, which, it doesn't really add up or make any sense, but you see this migrate from a guy named Michael Anton, who used to work for Trump, and this conservative website.
Flight 93 election.
Yes, exactly. You see it go from there, and then you see it move to figures like Dan Bongino, who's a podcaster, has a big following and is very successful at cracking the top 10 list for shares and likes and comments on Facebook's newsfeed. Then you see Trump praise it. Then you see it go to Tucker Carlson's show. Then it goes crazy online more, and then it goes back to Trump. And you end up, or I'm sure it will continue, but the last sort of bit of it before my story came out was Trump retweeting someone who was responding to a tweet about Nancy Pelosi and a coup. Okay, so all of that stuff does not happen the same way in Europe. There are these two researchers I talked to in Germany and France, and they basically tried to do what Yochai and his group did in France and Germany. And they were kind of sheepish about the fact that they didn't have any findings. Like, they had found pockets of disinformation on YouTube among right-wing extremists, but they did not find something that had major network television and a government leader as part of its speech. So I thought that was pretty compelling. And the research about misinformation and the coronavirus is similar, where it's not that you're right, like you can find, snake oil salesmen, et cetera, online in Europe, but it doesn't have the same currency and amplification and really mainstream circulation. And I think like QAnon is another example of this, where we see this thing that if it was just like a fringe element of life, we would all shrug it off, but you see it metastasize. And you can argue that this is as much a phenomenon of Trump and his addiction or promulgation of disinformation as it is like our messed up media ecosystem. But I think there's something going on here that has also to do with the way in which the Europeans after World War II were more willing to police speech and also much more interested in investing in public broadcasting. And so they have these trusted sources of information, and we have moved into a much more fragmented ecosystem in which Fox News is this incredibly important outlet of trust among conservatives, but it doesn't have any competition for factual accuracy among other conservative media outlets, and I think that's a huge part of the problem. So I don't know
that's
then
interesting.
No, I think there's a lot there. Sorry, go ahead, Emily.
No, that's all. I'm winding up annoyingly.
No, but that I think that's a ton to unpack. But I guess I would say, like, I was giving a talk about what I first saw, like, when it was a paper I never ended up writing because I got sucked into the stupid oversight board project. But
I'm going to turn the light on. That's why I'm walking. Sorry.
Okay. But it was called like the digital democracy deficit, and it was about how Europe was basically through things like the GDPR was like putting forth like ideas like the Brussels effect, effectively the Brussels effect. Like they were setting standards like for privacy and other types of things that like America had to meet. Not because our laws demanded it, but because it was just easier for the companies to have one standard that met the European standard, and then it would also meet like an American standard. And I think that there's a bunch of issues with that. I would say, like, I know that like everyone's really hard on the libertarian take on this, and I would just say I'm like a little always surprised at this from Ben, because like part of what I always see is like I look at China and the way that like authoritarian governments control the internet, and it does terrify me. And I think that like, but for like, I do feel like there is a space of like privilege in which we have had a free society for so long, and we can have these debates within that free society about what can stay up and what should come down, what we see, that we forget that we also have to fear the government. And so like, and I'm not a libertarian. I just like really say that it's like I like look at the board and I see the powers that be, and like I see the government as like a potential power, and like typically I don't see it as a hugely restricting power, but I think that is because of like for speech, but I think that is because of like a little bit like where I grew up in.
Second, before you get to China, there's a lot of space between American libertarianism on the free speech issue. We're all, broadly speaking, libertarian on the free speech issue. It's just a question of gradation of how libertarian. Yes. So take the true threat doctrine, right? There is no other democratic country that defines threat as narrowly as we do.
Yeah.
And
that's like,
like, you know, if you like the idea that our former regular viewer who was what's his name, who had a Supreme Court case. No, the rapper who,
but yeah, that guy,
bad guy. You know, he used to be on In Lieu of Fun.
Sorry.
Alanis, yeah. So this would not have gone to the Supreme Court of Canada. And I don't think Mr. Alanis, and I don't like, he won his case. Good for him. You know,
maybe.
Like,
I'm with you.
I'm not sure it's good for the cop. Let's put it that way. Yeah. I'm not sure, right? And I think there are a lot of, and so my question is, what is the marginal freedom that is being protected that is of real value, rather than the marginal freedom to terrorize somebody? And I think you can go through U.S. jurisprudence in the free speech area, starting with, I think it really begins with the case that Terminiello, which is the case that Justice Jackson dissented, and in the course of dissenting writes the phrase that the Constitution is not a suicide pact, right? Like, there is this sort of, starting in the late 40s, we diverge from other countries' free speech traditions. And it's not clear to me that we're diverging in a fashion that is protective of some kind of liberty. But in Terminiello, it's the liberty to be an outspoken Nazi in a fashion that may provoke, a riot in real time, but doesn't quite provoke a riot, just could reasonably be expected to. And if you take that and Brandenburg and the true threats doctrine together and a bunch of these sort of cases that start developing in the 40s, there's a real divergence between the US and other countries, and it's not clear to me that it's protecting useful liberty as opposed to the liberty to just get this close to causing violence rather than this close.
Emily, I know you have to go to a soccer game, so I'm
gonna stay for a little while because it's too interesting, and I was
okay. But Sarah Longwell is also here, Ben. If you want to bring her in,
let's bring Sarah Longwell in and talk about the future of free speech in the context of the election.
I'm defending the fucking First Amendment doctrine. I am the most legal realist. I think they made it all up. I don't think there's any coherency to it. I literally was hated it in law school because I didn't think it made any sense.
Hello, Sarah Longwell.
But Emily, hi.
I got an emergency Twitter message that I should join at 5:30, so here I am.
Here you are. Welcome, because we thought we were losing Emily at 5:30. So
now it's too interesting for me to leave as yet. So I'm going to stay for another 10 minutes or so.
You guys should keep talking about what you were talking about with Emily, though, because it is above my pay grade. I have no
that jacket is above everyone else's pay grade. Nice work, Sarah.
I also love the fact that just over your left shoulder it says ACK.
Mm.
Yeah.
Ackland Street. Sorry.
This may or may not have been the street that my dorm was on in college.
I guess it's your right shoulder. It's left to me.
You could always make it just ACK and cover up the rest of it.
Exactly. Emily, what do you think about the First Amendment doctrine? Do you agree with Ben, or are you kind of fed up with it? I don't really know that it matters.
I'm glad you gave the full-throated defense, because I think the counter argument to Ben, and in some ways to me, is what Ginsburg said in Shelby County. You're taking down your umbrella, and it's the thing that's keeping you from getting wet. And you think you don't have that much to fear from the government, let's see what happens
until you do.
Anymore. So I hear that. So I would say two things.
I forgot that Ginsburg wrote that in Shelby. I
just want to say, if the government wants to come in and oppress people who make stomp videos, bring it on.
I also have zero sympathy for that animal torture case. I'm totally with you on that one.
There was one vote for my beliefs in that, and it was Sam Alito.
No, I'm with you and Sam Alito on that particular one. I guess I would say more broadly that I think, and this is an idea from Timothy Garden Ash, that there are these three paths. There is the authoritarian approach that China has taken. We don't want to go there. There's our relatively libertarian absolutist approach, in which I think I agree with Ben. If you worry about the slippery slope argument, then you don't want to breach any of these defenses. I'm not someone who's particularly sympathetic to slippery slope arguments, so I'm willing to imagine this other third path, which I think is the one Europe has taken. And look, it's not a coincidence that this split happened in the late 40s. They had the experience of fascism and the Holocaust, and we didn't. And we remained fundamentally optimistic that in the marketplace of ideas, the good ideas were going to triumph. And that's just not really true a lot of the time. And I think it's not true now. And
it's not true specifically in an environment where you can amplify and spread speech the way that we can now.
Yeah.
I think that's really the thing.
Right. I mean, this is something you study and know more about than me, but I feel like the tidal wave of speech that's used to suppress other speech online, and then the way in which Yochai and his team's work show that that's amplified in the right-wing broadcast media, is really powerful. And our First Amendment just doesn't address any of that, is basically unable to even really formulate the question. And I guess the other thing is, and this really does go to your work, Kate, like, are we better off saying, oh, no, the government can't regulate this. The government can't even like hold the companies to their own standards, or even just require some data transparency so we could know what the hell is going on, right? We don't even know how prevalent disinformation and hate speech is on these platforms. Do we really want the government to be that hands-off? Because whenever we do that, we make Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey and whoever the head of YouTube is more powerful. And like, I don't like the idea that Facebook is the one setting up this international body. I have, if anything, less trust for this corporation than I would for government officials who I elect. So anyway, I wonder how you think about all of this.
Well, actually, it's really fascinating because I think that when people are typically saying like we want to regulate Facebook or we want to regulate one of these bodies that like, or we want to regulate a platform, that what they really mean is like we want to feel like we can control them. We want to feel like they are not off there doing their own thing without any say over what they're doing, right?
Yeah, can I just interject there that I'm sick of people saying they want to regulate social media without finishing the sentence and saying to require blank.
Yes.
I don't even care what the blank is, but like I want to regulate them in the abstract.
Yes.
What do you want to regulate them to require?
Yeah, I want them to have a public interest obligation that changes how the algorithms work and reduces the spread of disinformation and hate speech, which now they have zero reason to do that unless they decide to do it themselves.
Those are amazing directives. So here's my thing.
I can debate any subsequent answer to that. And some of them I'll even agree with. It's very hard to argue with the principle I want to regulate them. You want to regulate them to what? Comply with OSHA? They're to have seriously. EPA requirements. People use I want to regulate them as a catch-all for I don't know what the rules should be, but somebody should figure it out.
Ben and I were bitching about this before the green room. I just gave a talk today and someone was like, so should we regulate them? And I was like, well, what do you mean? And then they got really angry at me that I was pushing back on their question. And I was like, doesn't make any sense. He's like, it's on like the front page of the New York Times right now. I'm like, that doesn't make it a good
I want to regulate them to require that there be no rodents in any of their offices.
So
anyway. I have more ambitious. I mean, I guess what I think is that the Europeans are just going to, in the next year or two, start leading the way on this more than they already are, unless they get captured to the degree that I think Congress is at the moment captured and pretty paralyzed. On the third hand, there is some bipartisan interest in both using antitrust law and the issue of Section 230 and immunity to try to take some steps. It's just that in America, the Republicans and Democrats are coming at this for such different reasons. It's hard to imagine them actually getting on the same train. I don't know.
Politics is super gross in this, but I will say this. So when people say regulate, and what I said before is like we want to have some type of say and control over what these companies are doing. What I see that as saying is that you have to actually think outside this like three-party system of like platforms, like these companies, a government that regulates a company that operates inside its borders or whatever, because these companies are much bigger than that. And then like users, which are much bigger than any one part of like America or India or whatever. And so instead what you're basically saying is like, I read that and I think I am very much like alone in this, but like I read that as like what you're looking for government is the type of accountability that you have felt like you've had from democratic governments, in which you vote for people and you have like some type of like, you have some type of say in what those people say, whether it's direct or not, whether it's perfect or not. There is like that kind of like level of transparency. I think that as opposed to like having a government reach in and like kind of control these tech companies, that there is another type of like possible world in which we call on these companies to basically create these, or then and in fact enshrine it later in regulation of like kind of like self-directed. If they're going to be governing areas of public and human rights, that they have to be accountable in some way and have systems of accountability to their users that are built into the platforms, and you democratize and create a participatory process in the private company. It is never something that we've really talked about before, I think. But like,
but Kate, what does that mean? Does that mean that the government has some role here, or does that mean that we rely on them to self-regulate entirely? Like, when you say accountability, where does it come from? Is it like we might voice them?
And this part I think is experiment and like kind of norm setting, which is like I don't think we know yet. But I think that this is where the Facebook Oversight Board is absolutely not perfect and no solution, but it is like a step forward and an experiment in this. And like you could see a regulatory process that mandates these types of oversight councils or some type of independent types of councils that like serve this type of function, and make it more like public broadcasting, or make it more like something that is like prone to like a panel of the community experts that want certain things on or certain things off at certain times or whatever else. And that all of that could happen. But I just think that the top down way that we're thinking about it is never going to work, just because we're not there yet in terms of even understanding how these things impact our lives and what we expect from them. I know that sounds like very mushy, but like, that's kind of, I just don't know what it would look like in the actuality. Are people frozen? No, I'm not frozen.
No, we're here.
We're here. So I guess, I would start with, we don't know what it looks like, because we don't even know what's going on. And we don't know that in part because we're relying on these companies to provide data they're not providing. So I would just want to start with the government having some, and whether it's us or the Europeans, I'm agnostic about, some requirement of data transparency that will allow us to have a clear picture. But that is not, I don't think the companies are going to do it themselves. I guess I'm much less optimistic at this point about what they're going to provide on their own. And, they've been doing some things differently a little bit in the last month, right? We could talk about the New York Post story about Hunter Biden and whether we think they're being successful or not. But they are more worried about this American election in terms of actually acting than they've been about lots of other elections in other countries, not to mention ethnic violence, that they were pretty ready to just ignore, or it's certainly not take responsibility for, in the name of libertarian free speech. So maybe that's a baby step forward, but I just don't have any faith that corporations are going to act in anything other than their profit-driven business model interest unless we make them. That's just not the history of corporate America or corporate anything. That's not how, I don't think that's how capitalism works, to sound a little grandiose.
No, we can have it. I think this is a bigger combo, but I agree with you I agree with you a lot. And I think that there are other things at stake here, but but we have to switch to Sarah, because Sarah's sitting there with her act. I feel like this is Kathy. Isn't Kathy sorry, my video went out, but isn't Kathy the cartoon that says "ack" all the time? Isn't it like Kathy? She's like "ack." No,
maybe I'm not a huge Peanuts person, but
no. Kathy is the awful middle-aged woman that drinks a lot of wine and has cats and it says "ack." Sorry. Sorry.
So Sarah,
still on topics I know nothing about. Still.
But I want to talk about a subject that you know everything about.
Thank God.
The election.
Tell us everything.
Yeah. Are you optimistic yet?
Yeah, I am. I am optimistic. Look.
Wow. So that's wait. Breaking news. Sarah Longwell has cusped the top of the mountain and will now confess to optimism.
Here's the thing. I don't know if I ever mentioned this. I come on here a lot for whatever reason. And
because we're awesome.
Yeah. I'm just saying, I may have given you this data point before, which is that I'm something of a gambler.
Oh yeah, I know that.
I like to go to Las Vegas and gamble, right? And so if I were going to bet my milk money right now, I'd bet it on the guy who's up 11 points in the national averages, because very basic math is something that I can do, right? 11 points up, better than 11 points down. And so I would
rocket science here, Sarah.
Saying nothing gets past me is all I'm saying. And so for that reason, and also, as I've talked about here, I've done the focus groups. And look, I did a focus group last Tuesday, non-college. Okay, so we're talking about non-college white women. We're talking about the base of Trump's vote. And of these 2016 Trump voters, the entire group, not a single one was going to vote for Trump again. They were undecided, but they were undecided between the libertarians and Joe Biden.
I love your focus groups. I want to buy all of them drinks. This sounds.
You think that, but I have reporters sit in on them frequently, and I will tell you they have concerns. Because there's a lot of people who say things that would blow your hair back a bit. Lot of loss in faith of institutions, a lot of disbelief, not a lot of people up for vaccines these days in this particular group, but also not a lot of people who want to vote for Trump. And the reason is, and here's the thing, part of the reason that I feel more optimistic is that Donald Trump has all kinds of access to levers of government and megaphones with which he could be doing a great deal to better his position in this election. So, for example, he could be passing a corona relief package and signing his name on all the checks like he did last time. But he's not doing that. The Republicans aren't passing coronavirus relief, and that is upsetting a lot of voters. He could be talking about the pandemic. He could be speaking to the thing that is the most top of mind for all of these women. But he's not doing that. He is going on stage and sort of begging women to vote for him. Suburban women, please like me. Interestingly, not. Oh, bye, everyone. We've never met.
Thank you, Emily.
Bye, Emily. It's totally fine.
Sarah, that's
great
totally
seeing you.
I'm sorry to leave, and thank you for having me, and sorry for being such a crazy. Mwah. Bye.
It's fun to have you. Bye.
Yeah.
So, what? Keep going with the blow my hair back kind of reactions from these people. I don't think you've said anything yet that surprises me.
I guess, look, first of all, there's a lot of people who are really good on race issues, better than you would expect, but there's plenty of people who say things that you wouldn't love to hear. Like anybody who doesn't listen to the police when they say something to them deserve to get shot 7 times in the back. There are plenty of things that voters who are only minimally engaged say. Actually, the thing that you would be most alarmed by, I think, is just the level of information that people have. The extent to which you ask them about an event and they don't know much about it, or what they do know is clearly so for example, this is one of my favorites. When somebody said that the debt was one of their big issues. And I said, interesting. How do you feel like Donald Trump is doing on the debt? And they said, I think he's really chipping away at it. And, you
what?
Said, okay.
Really?
That does not comport with reality, but that's not my job. I'm not there to do fact checking. Right?
Right.
How hard is that, by the way? How hard is it to listen sometimes if people say things that are wildly and do people know that you're gay? Do people know anything about you? Do they know your full name? Could they Google you?
They don't know anything about me, and I think not to play a twist on what you just said, but I play it pretty straight for the focus groups, right? I'm not trying to tip my hand to being on a side, right? I'm trying to probe, and also because the point of the focus groups,
You're not trying to persuade them.
I'm trying to persuade them. That would be the least cost-effective persuasion strategy ever. I will spend 2 hours
personal ads. I will meet with you individually.
Yeah. Do you love me yet? Will you listen to me? Do what I do? That's not how this works. And so I am totally, I try not to betray anything. I try to probe. I try to ask questions that would, lend somebody to think I might just as well be interested in Trump voting as I would be against Trump voting. As far as they definitely don't know that I'm gay, except I will say a fair amount of the time I'm wearing a 3/4 zip up Nationals thing, which, they signal something.
But do you use your name? If somebody Googles you, they can find out that you run Republican voters against Trump, right? They can
use
find out as much as they want about you.
No, I don't use my last name. I just say Sarah. I'm Sarah. I live in Washington. I do focus groups and other things for a living in the beginning.
I see.
I got 2 kids. And so I try to be, and here's the thing. I never moderated these until the pandemic. I would go to a physical location for a long time and have a professional moderator do these for a long time. But once we ended up in our basements, I was like, I'm just going to do these. Like, I can do it. And it's funny. A lot of my staff, watch them, observe them on blacked out Zoom screens. And you get a lot of people who talk about how they are anti-gay. Like, that's one of the things that animates them as a conservative. I will express nothing in those, but my staff thinks it's funny because sometimes, like, I had somebody at one point be like, I will vote for anybody who makes there be a 4-day work week. And I was like, what are you talking about? And then, my staff is like, you were totally blank whenever people were gay bashing, but the second somebody suggested a 4-day work week, you couldn't contain yourself.
One you've trained to, and the other you haven't, Sarah.
Yeah, that's that's fascinating. I love how you conduct these. You have a gift for this. Like, I think this is pretty fascinating.
So I want to ask you about the early vote. I was listening to you and JVL on the Secret podcast, which is, for those of you who do not subscribe to the Bulwark Plus to get the Secret podcast, you are missing Sarah and Jonathan V. Last, who for the longest time, by the way, I thought was JBL. I don't know why. I just couldn't hear the difference between V and B, and I thought he was JBL, and it wasn't until I saw it written that I realized it was V. That's neither here nor there. But you guys were talking about the early vote, and those numbers are astonishing, and I can't decide what they mean, right? So one read of them is, this is a huge turnout wave, and we have 6 times the number of early voters that we did at this time 4 years ago. 25% of the 2016 election electorate has already voted. And these are incredible numbers. But I can tell 2 stories about that. One is Democrats are voting early and Republicans are going to vote on election day. Also, those of us who care a shitload voted on the first day possible, thus inflating those numbers. Numbers are going to crash down as people who care a little bit less maybe don't vote so early. And the other story is that, these are huge numbers and they show a Democratic wave going on. They're overwhelmingly Democratic voters. And so my question is, how do you understand the early vote, or are you just choosing not to process it at this point?
Yeah, so I think a serious person would choose not to process it because you just don't know. You don't know which of those stories are telling. I'm not that serious of a person, so I will tell you that I think it's a turnout thing. I mean, I think that the lines, it'd be one thing if it was just the mail-in, but it's the lines too. It's the people who are showing up. And so, listen.
Combined with the money.
Yeah, combined with the donations. That's the thing, right? There's a lot of data points that you can use right now. And so, I'm inputting my focus groups. I'm inputting things like there is no third party drawing vote. There is a third party, the Libertarians, but they're not drawing particularly a lot of votes, which was a big factor in the 2016 election. I'm looking at Joe Biden's positive negative, where he is running actually in the surplus on a positive, which is one of the things that Hillary Clinton did not have in 2016. She and Donald Trump they were hugely in the negative. You look at the enthusiasm around the money, the amount of money coming in for Democrats, and then you just look at these.
There seems like there's so much money. Is there? And I'm not a campaign finance person, but just as an aside, what happens at the end of a campaign with that much money? I forget.
Yeah, we were just debating this the other day casually. And we had an argument.
It's not just that, but it's like Project Lincoln, all of these places. Like,
no, I know the answer to this question.
Like voters against, like, what do you do with this?
So first of all, a committee, a campaign committee that has, it takes a long time to wind down a committee, like years and years and years. And so the Biden 2020 campaign will have expenditures for years and years into the future. So one thing is you hold on to enough money to actually manage the expenses of the committee. It'll have legal and auditing expenses for many years to come. The second thing is that the surplus money is transferable to other campaign committees. And so, for example, if Biden decides to run for re-election, a certain amount of this can roll over into that context. But the third issue is they're going to spend an enormous amount of money. And,
especially in the last few days,
you can actually, if you have to hire an Uber for everybody who needs to get to the polls and you have the money to do it, there are limits on how you can't give money to voters, but you can do a lot. And so I would be, one of the things you do if you're Jamie Harrison and you have $57 million raised in a very short period of time is you develop a plan to spend that. And I would be surprised, Rick Wilson says all of this, says this a lot, and I think he's right, die in debt if you're a campaign. There's no point in having money that you don't spend. So go out and spend it. And by the way, if you waste some of it, if you're spending a lot of money per vote and you have $57 million in South Carolina, that's fine. Jesus. And the Lincoln Project, by the way, is a continuing operation, as is, I assume, Republican voters against Trump. I mean, you guys will continue, if you have surplus money at the end, you're going to continue to do activity that's in the spirit of the enterprise, right?
Yeah, I mean, the DDT, which is the Defending Democracy Together, which is the C4 that manages Republican voters against Trump, also has Republicans for the Rule of Law. We will continue to do the work to save democracy because at some point, there's like late money that comes in, and the question is like, can I spend this responsibly? And the answer is not always at some point, at some point, and the point is right about now, you say to donors, like, I'm cutting it off in 2 days because after that, I cannot spend the money responsibly. And you see people do this where they just like panic, spend the money. That's a bad idea. You should have a plan to spend the money usefully, as opposed to just being like vomiting it into some place because you got to get it off your books.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I'm also just very interested in, I think that you're spending more time with people that are actually, obviously, because this is what you specialize in, but like Republican voters against Trump, or like the focus groups of people that are going to be voting in certain ways. And growing up, I always had exposure. Like, I went to a very liberal college and then like had all of this exposure to people that had never been outside the liberal bubble in their life, and like had no idea what it was like to know people that were going to vote for George W. Bush or anything else. And it's kind of fascinating to me to like hear you kind of like make sense of this and like this populace. I wonder if you're going to write up any of your findings like in a more academic way. Do you have any like kind of designs on that?
I don't know how to write things in an academic way. I wrote something for the Atlantic.
But you have all this great poll work. I feel like it should like not go to waste.
Does that mean do I have to include footnotes, or like what do you do when you write things in an academic way? Because I don't want to do something that has footnotes. Listen, I'm writing a book. It's called The Committee to Not Reelect the President. I've been writing it in my head for 3 years. It's coming, I'm sure, soon.
Committee to Not Reelect the President does not have the same roll off the tongue as creep. Yeah, exactly.
The Committee to Reelect the President is like a standard thing. And so this is
no. That's why I'm joking. Like creep has like CREEP was like the acronym, but like Committee to Not Re-elect the President doesn't.
CNREAP.
Yeah.
CNREAP. Thanks, Ben.
CNREAP. I think that's important. I think you should write that book. I think it should have no footnotes, no cited sources of any kind. Sarah Longwell, you're a great American. We've got 2 more weeks.
What are you doing with your
I'm going to ask you the
Sarah?
the same question I asked Tim Miller. What are you doing for election night? Tell us about the live stream that you guys are going to have.
So the Bulwark Plus that we've launched, which is doing extremely well, by the way, probably from all the promotion we get on your show. A lot of our folks come on this show. But Bulwark,
You should all subscribe to the Bulwark Plus, and because then you get the secret podcast, which is really cool.
That's right. You do, and you can hang out with us on election night. So Bulwark staff is gonna do shifts, but from like 8 until midnight, we're gonna just live stream, and we're gonna just come in and out. Different people will.
What platform are you using? Are you using Crowdcast so you can disappear into a black box like Kate just did?
No, actually,
I'm coming back. I'm right here.
I don't even understand what you guys do. No, we'll just like be on Zoom, and we've been doing these Zooms like post game analysis after the debates and stuff, and they're awesome. They're so fun. Lots of people tune in. People like hang out in their sweats and like talk to us. They blow up the chat. It's great. It's great.
No Jeffrey Toobin situations.
Oh my God, Ben, too soon.
Do you know?
Sorry.
When that happened, I like put it in my office Slack, and I was like, I have a lot of questions about this, and I was like, but I don't want anybody to answer them. I was like, I don't know.
That was like the entire play-by-play on Twitter.
I
People
had
were
to.
like, I want to know more and simultaneously less about this entire exchange.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. No, I've had a long conversation with Charlie Sykes about it today on the Bulwark podcast. I have to say it was not a comfortable conversation, but we both agreed that being caught masturbating in front of the staff of the New Yorker was a kind of like ultimate nightmare.
Like, it really, like, the more you say it, the more I feel like it's so meta. Like,
no, it's like if you imagined
like
if Woody Allen in 1972
Yes, it's like a Woody
wrote
Allen
like
movie.
the ultimate
Yes.
nightmare for
Yes.
like a Washington writer, it would have been that.
Oh God.
Well, we've brought it around full circle.
If we're talking about this, though, I just have a lot of real questions about like camera angles.
Are they
about
like, do I have to we don't have to like explain biology to you, right, Sarah? You've like understand the workings of like, no, maybe not.
I'm like this. I mostly get it. But what I don't understand, and maybe somebody can enlighten me for people who have more experience with this. What is the arousing element of a Zoom call?
You got us.
Yeah, I
Like,
think that is.
I have been many things during a Zoom meeting aroused. It's never been one of them.
Like you're doing an election simulation, not stimulation, an election simulation, and like, what possesses one?
It's
I actually, so like,
it's David Remnick.
I should maybe, it's not David Remnick, but I should maybe say, like, before I get into trouble, but like, I would just say that, like, this was not a surprising revelation of like, from like things that I have heard and like other stuff. Like, it's just like craziness. But there is like, all I will say is that like, apparently it kind of seemed that he, according to the Vice article and other sources that I have talked to, that it seemed like he was simultaneously live streaming some type of engagement with another person and then having the Zoom call.
So you don't think he was turned on by David Remnick?
I think that he has a problem probably with like figuring out how to like have a healthy relationship with that and his work life, but like there is like that's pretty much like kind of how it went. So
all right, on that cheerful note,
there will be a live stream on election night for the Bulwark Plus.
Everybody will have pants.
Everyone.
And the cameras will be on the upper halves of the body, whatever may be going on in the lower halves.
Yep.
I will be watching the Bulwark live stream. in my backyard, where we will have the returns projected on the side of the house.
Then we have to have a conversation about how we're going to do it for the show, if we're going to do something for the show.
We do. We have to talk about in lieu of election returns.
If you guys do it, I'll bounce in. You let me know. You can always
excellent. And if you guys want us to bounce into the Bulwark stream, let us know.
We can crossover episode.
We can have a prisoner exchange.
Crossover episode, jumping the shark.
Kate, who is our guest for tomorrow?
Jonathan Rauch. The amazing Jonathan Rauch.
We are workshopping Jonathan Rauch's book tomorrow.
Live.
That is super exciting.
Six chapters of really intense. Well, at least my two chapters are intense. I don't know about Ben's. I'm like, I rip Jonathan apart. I just tear him limb from limb.
All right, that will be 22 hours and 52 minutes from now. And until then, we don't have fun anymore. We certainly don't have discretion in talking about the travails of Jeffrey Toobin. But we do have a Zoom sex scandal, the first great Zoom sex scandal of the COVID era. And here is to many more of them.
We can only hope.
Cheerio, guys. See you tomorrow.
Bye.
Sarah, you're the best.
Thanks. You're the best.
You're the best.
No, you're the best.